Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would do this little video today, all in all, and this is going to be another video yet again about Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. And I've done, I've done a lot of videos on Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez as of lately, but the reason why that is once again is because Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, I do believe him to be the number one pound for pound fighter. But depending on which media outlet that you watch, especially when it comes to a certain amount of these YouTube channels, like that specifically of New Media or the LDBC, depending on which channel you watch, but specifically those of Adante's Boxing Nation or Aki TV or Boxing Ego, you're going to see overall that the typical narrative that they try to, play out is that Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, that he usually, faces the weakest contenders and all in all, he never faces any of the good ones. He's facing B and C grade competition and he faces people off their worst performance or at the worst point in their career. And we're basically going to kill that narrative today. Now, I've already spoken about a certain amount of these things in the past. But today we're actually going to be doing a certain amount of things different. Because, when it comes down to it, and I think that the majority of people, at least all in all, that end up seeing the videos, they more than likely probably agree with me. But just for the people that may debate it when it comes down to it, and like I said, I don't have any problems with disagreements. But in this video, I'm going to, as logically and objectively as I can, break down Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez's career. Now, as you can see here, we're actually on Wikipedia.com. And the reason why that is because we're going to take a look at Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez's record. And we're not only going to be taking a look at Canelo's record, we're also going to be taking a look at Gervonta Tank Davis's record. We're also going to be taking a look maybe at Terence Crawford's a little bit later on down the line, but I don't know if I'm going to do him quite for this video. Terence Crawford, of course, in my opinion, he doesn't really quite have the resume of a Saul Canelo Alvarez, but I won't completely blame that on him. Maybe a little bit, because of course he resigned with Top Rank at that one point in time. But at least Terence Crawford at 135 and at 140, he did face everyone overall that he pretty much needed to. So I'll give Terence Crawford, that amount of credit and that amount of respect, because that is, pretty much the truth on that one. But anyways, what we're going to look at in this video, we're actually going to take a look at three fighters' resumes. We're going to take a look at Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. We're going to take a look at Mr. Gervonta Tank Davis. And we're also going to take a look at Mikey Garcia. Because like I said, a certain amount of these people that put this narrative out here and basically say that Canelo Alvarez, that, he just faces these weaklings and all sorts of stuff. We're going to take a look overall at the people that he has faced, how dangerous, in my opinion, those contenders were at the time. We're going to talk about all that. And we're going to take a look at his opponent's record and see, all in all, how good they were at the time. So this narrative, once again, this narrative to where people always say, oh, Canelo, he's facing these cupcakes and he faces them when they're only vulnerable. All that is bullshit. And like I said, listen, is that me saying that maybe Canelo, once again, has not done some maneuvering here and there? That's not what I'm saying. Maybe Canelo has done some maneuvering here and there. That's not what I'm saying. Do I think, of course, that he should face Charlo and Benavidez and Andrade eventually? Yes, all that. But at the end of the day, once again, if you're going to go on the narrative and say that Canelo just faces B and C grade competition, listen, unless we're talking about Rocky Fielding or Avni Yildirim, that is not the case. And we're going to take a look at that in this video. So let's get into it. First of all, let's get into Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez's record. And let's go to his professional boxing record. So I'm going to go all the way back to his first big fight, in my opinion, which was the Austin Trout fight. Now, this fight happened all the way back in 2013. I'm not really going to talk about the Josesito Lopez or the Shane Mosley fights or even the Kermit Cintron or Alfonso Gomez fights, because those guys, in my opinion, they had already been knocked out, I believe, multiple times at that point in time in their career. So I'm not really going to be talking about those guys. Shane Mosley, he was 40 years old and coming off of 2 losses. So we're not going to talk about those guys. But the first one that we will talk about is Austin Trout. Now, of course, in 2013, now you see that Austin Trout, I believe here, he was the WBA champion here when it came down to it. Austin Trout, I think he was perhaps maybe the regular champion. I would have to take a look at it. But Austin Trout, at that point in time, for those of you that don't remember, and he was a black fighter. Well, he still is a black fighter when it comes on, didn't change ethnicities on us, but you know what I mean. This narrative, all in all, that a certain amount of people, they always love to say that Canelo Alvarez, that he never faces, he's never faced usually elite black fighters, especially after Floyd Mayweather Jr. beat him. Once again, like I said, that is not true. Now, if you want to say that Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo, that, he hasn't fought them yet, I suppose you could say that. But like I said, in my opinion, they're not necessarily, super duper above some of the contenders that Canelo Alvarez has faced as of recently. But we're going to get into that a little bit later. So you have Austin Trout here. And if you don't believe me, we can take a look at Austin Trout. We can get into it. And for those of you that remember, that was after his win over Miguel Cotto. Miguel Cotto, of course, I believe was coming off of a loss over Floyd Mayweather Jr. And there you see it. December 1st, 2012, unanimous decision win over Miguel Cotto. And when it came down to it, retained the WBA regular light middleweight title. Now, I'm not sure all in all. It says right here, lost WBA regular light middleweight title. I'm not sure if they upgraded it to just regular, the official WBA title. I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, Austin Trout was an undefeated fighter. That was a big win. And a lot of people, of course, they'll say that, that was a very competitive fight and that it was controversial. If you know how to score a boxing fight, and if you take a look at that fight, no, the fight was not that competitive. I'm not saying that the fight was not competitive here and there, but the fight was not competitive enough, in my opinion, to be scored even close for Austin Trout. It just is what it is. In my opinion, the max amount of rounds that Austin Trout took in that fight, re-watching it, probably was about 4 rounds. It just is what it is. Canelo Alvarez completely dominated the fight. He completely outsped Austin Trout. He completely landed the more cleaner and impactful punches. It just is what it is. He was able to outdo Trout. Now, Trout, in my opinion, he's not really someone that, I wouldn't necessarily compare him to the same level as a Jermall Charlo, perhaps, if you want to say that. But what I will say is this. There is another fighter that is slicker, in my opinion, all in all, than what an Austin Trout and Jermall Charlo were. And you guys already know who that is, in my opinion. And it's not Floyd Mayweather Jr. either. It's the fighter that he fought a couple fights after that. And we're going to be talking about that. But Austin Trout, that was the first major victory of Canelo Alvarez's career. And then, of course, we know the next fight. He did lose to Mr. Floyd Mayweather Jr. I thought that he lost quite clearly. Of course, there's that one judge that scored it a draw. Excuse me, it is what it is. So we know what happened there. So Floyd Mayweather Jr., and if we want to, get a little bit more narrative into it, Floyd Mayweather Jr. also, yes, he was 36 years old, but he was still undefeated. Floyd has never lost in his professional boxing career officially, and he was still the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. So these people that try to allege that Floyd was his grandpa, no, he wasn't. Yes, he was 36 years old, but he was at a very decent point in his career. Keep in mind that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was still beating top contenders, and he was able to beat Manny Pacquiao, I believe, when he was about 37, 38 years old. All right? So Floyd Mayweather Jr. was still the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter, even when he was 39 years old. This is what I'm saying. Even when fighters are older, you cannot treat every fighter the same. Because you have certain fighters like a Floyd Mayweather Jr. or a Bernard Hopkins that are very, very good when they're older with age. All right, so it is what it is. But anyways, moving on. So then he beats Alfredo Angulo. I'm not really going to talk about Alfredo Angulo that much because, in my opinion, Alfredo Angulo, he's always been just okay. If you wanted to state that Canelo beat him at the best point in his career, you could debate that because, I believe Angulo, he right after this, I think he actually had a very, very tough fight with Lara, or maybe he even fought him after what Lara did. I can't remember. But anyways, this next fight, and this was the Erislandy Lara fight. Erislandy Lara, I'm not sure if he was the champion at the time, but we all know that Erislandy Lara, he was a very, very high competitor. And a lot of people thought that Canelo Alvarez actually was avoiding the Erislandy Lara fight. So Canelo ended up taking the Erislandy Lara fight. And of course, as you see right there, this was a split decision. But Canelo Alvarez, at the end of the day, ended up getting the victory. Now, you can argue, in my opinion, that maybe Lara deserved the victory over Canelo. You could if you wanted to. But if you do rewatch the fight overall, at least with a clear lenses and an objective eye, what I will say is this. I can see both sides. Because in my opinion, Lara, especially in the final rounds of the fight when it comes down to it, you can argue that perhaps maybe he should have threw a little bit more. But Erislandy Lara, if you watch him in that fight, Erislandy Lara, after Canelo Alvarez left the 154-pound division, it was not Charlo, neither Charlo brother. It wasn't either Charlo brother. It was not Julian J. Rock Williams. It was not, Demetrius Boo Andrade, who was looked at as the best overall 154-pounder. It was Erislandy Lara. Erislandy Lara was the one on top. Neither Charlo brother ever called out Erislandy Lara. Now, if you want to make the point, that was because they were sparring partners and, they were part of the same gym. You can make that point, but they never tried to fight Erislandy Lara. They never tried to fight him. Those are just the facts. It is what it is. Demetrius Boo Andrade at one point in time called out Erislandy Lara, but then when Lara actually decided that he wanted to fight him, Demetrius Andrade backed out of the fight. Or he overall said that he doesn't want to fight Lara because he was boring. Those are the facts. It is what it is. That's what happened. So he gets a win over Erislandy Lara. Controversial one if you wanted to say. But he ends up getting the victory over him. So let's go on to the next one. So this one is James Kirkland, of course. James Kirkland, at the one point in time, I believe he only had one loss. He was coming off of a layoff. But this was to the build-up of the Miguel Cotto fight. And Miguel Cotto, of course, he was with Freddie Roach when it came down to it. I believe that he was the WBC middleweight champion. Now, of course, the number one middleweight of the world at the time was looked at as Gennady Triple G Golovkin. But neither Miguel Cotto or Canelo Alvarez seemed interested in that fight at the current moment in time. But James Kirkland, when it came down to it, he was looked at. I'm not going to say that he was a super huge contender, but he was somewhat talented. But pretty much ever since the Canelo Alvarez knockout, he's pretty much done. He still had. Let me actually take a look at his record here. I'm not even sure. Maybe Canelo fought him after that loss against that one Japanese fighter, Ishida. I think no. So he actually was coming off of a couple decent wins, a TKO over Alfredo Ngulu, and a TKO win over Glenn Tapia. Both of those fighters at the time were decent contenders for that division. So Canelo actually pretty much fought him at the best point in his career, if you wanted to argue. I'm not going to put James Kirkland quite on the same level as some of the other ones because, as you can see, he never really won one of the official belts. But even James Kirkland, if you want to put on there, I suppose you could. I don't know if I would. But going into the next fight, this is Miguel Cotto. And as you can see, Canelo won the ring and the vacant WBC middleweight titles. Now, Miguel Cotto, I believe, actually was the WBC champion, but all in all, he vacated it, I believe, because whoever overall, I believe, actually won that fight was supposed to face Gennady Golovkin, and I don't know if Cotto was super interested in that fight at the time, but Miguel Cotto was coming off of a 3-fight win streak. Now, some of you may debate, well, Cotto was a bit older. I believe that he was about 34 years old when he fought Floyd Mayweather Jr., or excuse me, when he fought Canelo Alvarez. And Miguel, but don't forget, a certain amount of people, they may forget, that was looked at as a 50-50 fight at the time. There was a lot of people, let me tell you what, that channel, Dante's Boxing Nation, go and look at the video if you don't believe me. Go and look at the video. He predicted Miguel Cotto to beat Canelo Alvarez. So these people that say that Canelo beat Miguel Cotto when he was super old, no, he didn't beat him when he was super old. He beat him when he was the Ring Middleweight Magazine champion. Now, of course, that win that Miguel Cotto had, it was over, pretty much a done version of Sergio Martinez. But at the end of the day, Miguel Cotto looked revived at that point in time in his career. He knocked out, that one Dominican fighter, Delvin Rodriguez, who gave Austin Trout hell. He knocked him out within 3 rounds of Freddie Roach. Then in the next fight, he beat Sergio Martinez. Then he beat a little bit of a weight drained, Daniel Gill, who was an Australian contender at the time, who Gennady Golovkin knocked out within 3 rounds. Miguel Cotto knocked him out within 4 rounds. So that at least you can count as an A- to A grade win in his career. Now, if you want to say that Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao beat a better version of Miguel Cotto, that's your business. But Canelo Alvarez still beat a very, 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 very decent version of Miguel Cotto. So let's move on. So these next few fights, when it came down to it, build up to the Gennady Golovkin fight, so he beats Amir Khan. Amir Khan comes up from the 147-pound division. They face at 155, I believe. Now, Amir Khan, in my opinion, he's not necessarily what I would call an A-grade win for Canelo because, of course, he is naturally smaller, and he's a person that no one really expected him to beat Canelo. It pretty much was, proposed as strength versus speed. And Amir Khan, he was able to get to Canelo within the first couple rounds. I thought that Amir Khan won the first 2 rounds because he landed more, but Canelo was starting to figure him out by the 3rd round. He was starting to land more body shots, and then, of course, in the 6th round, we all remember, Amir Khan, he got a little bit too close to the zone. Canelo hit him with the right. Fight all over. It just is what it is. So, we don't necessarily have to talk about that one if you don't want to. Then, of course, he goes back down. Liam Smith at the 154-pound division. All right, now Liam Smith, overall, I believe that he was a WBO light middleweight champion. Now, in my opinion, Liam Smith, and now, of course, he has a brother, Callum Smith. Callum Smith, in my opinion, is way more talented of a boxer and athlete than what Liam Smith is. Liam Smith is not going to beat anyone elite. So at the time, of course, you can maybe argue that Canelo was somewhat maneuvering around Gennady Golovkin. But of course, eventually within the next couple fights, he fought him. But let's continue. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Now, in my opinion, Chavez Jr., if you wanted to say that this is one of the former champions that Canelo Alvarez beat, you could. But, like I said, I would not count Chavez Jr. necessarily as someone elite. But it was at least looked at as interesting because Chavez Jr., I believe, was a natural 168-pounder at the time, or 160, somewhere around there. But I think at the time he was at 168. But Chavez Jr., he was still looked at as a decent fighter. But actually, a lot of people don't remember. Some people actually gave Chavez Jr. a decent chance in that fight. But that was the fight, for those of you that don't remember, that was the fight where Chavez Sr., where all the, memes came out when it came down to where, Chavez Jr. was actually adopted with Chavez Sr. That's basically where Canelo Alvarez, he won every single round of that fight, completely embarrassed Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Then, of course, after that fight, Gennady Golovkin gets in the ring, and they set this fight up. And this is where Gennady Golovkin is at this point in time in his career. Gennady Golovkin is undefeated. He's undefeated. So a certain amount of people, of course, are going to say, oh, he waited till he got, old and all this other bullshit. Listen, Gennady Golovkin was 36 years old by the time that Canelo fought him in the rematch, I believe. But listen, when he, and we're going to look at his record too. We're gonna, overall, say overall how good Gennady Golovkin was at that point in time as well. All right, now the first fight, of course, was a draw. And in my opinion, I thought Gennady Golovkin should have won the fight. I thought that Gennady should have won it about 8 rounds to 4, 7 rounds to 5. But it was a somewhat competitive fight. I do think that Canelo Alvarez did deserve to lose the fight. But you head into the rematch. And Gennady Golovkin, now of course, the second fight ends up getting canceled at first. Because Canelo Alvarez, of course, ends up getting caught on a certain amount of clenbuterol. Suspended for 6 months. So Gennady Golovkin, he cannot face Canelo Alvarez next. But who does he face next? He faces Vanes Martirosyan. Now, Vanes Martirosyan at this point in time, he already has a couple of losses. But let's take a look overall at what Gennady Golovkin was able to do to Vanes Martirosyan. For the people overall that spread the narrative, like I said, that Canelo, that he fought him when he was at his weakest point. Okay, well, let's take a look. So he knocks out Vanes Martirosyan within 2 rounds. Now, let's take a look at Vanes Martirosyan's record. Let's take a look at his record when it comes down to it. He has 4 losses in his career. There's only one fighter that's knocked him out. One fighter, and his name is Gennady Triple G Golovkin. Let's take a look all in all at his record. That was his last fight. He's never fought since. The fight before that, he was coming off of a loss to Araceli Lara. Somewhat of a competitive fight in spots, but Lara clearly won the fight. Lara, in my opinion, won the fight 8 rounds to 4 at least. But no one's ever knocked him out. One over Ishe Smith. Very, very actually competitive and close fight with Jermell Charlo. I thought that Jermell Charlo just edged it out, but that was a very competitive fight. Go ahead and take a look at it. So what Gennady Golovkin was able to do overall to Vanes Martirosyan, no one else has been able to do that. And then, of course, you take a look at Demetrius Boo Andrade. He had a split decision with him. He ended up getting knocked down in that fight, for those of you that don't remember. So once again, Gennady, this is what I'm saying. For the people I don't know that say, oh, well, Canelo, he needs to face the real challenges. Like I said, this is not a Mikey Garcia, Gervonta Tank Davis situation where Canelo is truly, overall just never fighting the actual most talented contender of each division. Gennady was looked at as a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter at this point in time when Canelo actually fought him. These are the facts. It is what it is. It just is what it is. Now, Demetrius Andrade versus Vanes Martirosyan, I would have to watch that fight. I don't know if it was actually worthy of a split decision or not. But we're actually going to bring up, Demetrius Andrade's resume a little bit later. So then in the rematch, of course, and this is Gennady's record. Let me get back to Canelo Alvarez. So in the rematch, Canelo, very competitive fight with Gennady Golovkin. Of course, a lot of people thought Canelo lost. A lot of people thought Gennady lost. In my opinion, Canelo Alvarez won the fight at least 7 rounds to 5. I just thought that he was too quick. I thought his hand speed was too quick for Gennady Golovkin. And I thought all in all that, Canelo Alvarez, I just thought that he won. I thought that he landed more. I thought that he threw more. I thought that he usually landed the more impactful punches. It's not like Gennady Golovkin didn't try. It's not like Gennady Golovkin overall, like he didn't do good. But, when it comes down to it, like I said, he still had a little bit of an issue. Now, let's actually take a look at Gennady Golovkin's record afterwards, because people say, oh, well, Jermall Charlo is better than Gennady Golovkin because Jermall Charlo, he made Sergey Derevyanchenko look very bad, and Sergey Derevyanchenko, beat Gennady Golovkin. Well, Gennady Golovkin, like I said, he was never the same after he fought Canelo Alvarez in that rematch. And anyone who knows that, it's just the facts. I know that I'm saying that a lot in this video, but that's all these are. They're just facts. It is what it is. When you take a look overall at his resume, let's take a look at his resume. He was never the same after that fight. He KO'd Steve Rolls, who's an undefeated Canadian fighter, but no one looks at him as A grade. Then he faces Sergey Derevyanchenko in that fight. You can tell that his punch resistance isn't the same. Gennady Golovkin is a fighter that no matter how hard you've hit him when it comes down to it, and he's faced Danny Jacobs and Canelo Alvarez, 2 of the hardest hitters in the game, when it comes down to it. And then, of course, Gennady all the way back had that competitive fight against Danny Jacobs. Once again, someone actually tried to make the point on one of my videos one time that Gennady Golovkin, Canelo fought him when he was struggling with Danny Jacobs. Of course you're going to struggle with Danny Jacobs because Danny Jacobs was the biggest fight of his career. Like I said, until Canelo Alvarez. So that point doesn't even make sense. That's an idiotic point. It just is what it is. Because these fights before, I mean, David Lemieux, decent fighter, but none of these fighters are on the, Daniel Jacobs level. So, of course, that's going to be a close fight. But then afterwards, against Sergey Derevyanchenko, doesn't look the same at all. Doesn't look the same at all. Of course, and then, of course, he's going to fight Murata. But anyways, like I said, Gennady was not the same fighter by this time. He had a different trainer, all right, when it came down to it, which means that they probably tried to change the style up a little bit. He's not the same fighter, all right? He is not the same fighter that he used to be, all right? So it is what it is. And, let's actually go into Jamal Charlo's resume real quick, and we can get through that with Sergey Derevyanchenko real quick. And let's take a look overall at Sergey Derevyanchenko. Now, a lot of people want to say that, Canelo faces people off his worst performances. But Jamal Charlo, if you take a look at it, he faced Sergey Derevyanchenko, one of the bigger fights in his career, when he was coming off of a loss to Gennady Golovkin. Now, to be fair, that was a very, very competitive fight when it came down to it. Certain people thought Gennady won. Certain people thought that he lost. I would have to really watch it again. I don't really remember truly what I scored the fight. But like I said, Sergey Derevyanchenko, as you can see, this guy is not known as a world beater. I mean, who really has he beaten? He hasn't beat anyone. It just is what it is. He lost to Danny Jacobs. In my opinion, that should have not been a split decision. Lost to Gennady Golovkin. Loses to Jamal Charlo. And wow, I didn't even know that he lost to Carlos Adams. That's embarrassing. Anyways, okay. But you take a look at Jamal Charlo's record. And let's take a look at his record. For the people all in all that say that Jamal Charlo, that he is more impressive than a Billy Joe Saunders or a Caleb Plant or a Callum Smith, I'm not sure if I can agree with that. Because the certain people all in all, they say, well, Jamal Charlo, he just looks more impressive. But does he really? I'm not even going to bring up the Juan Macias Montiel fight. But if you want to, take a look at the Matt Korobov fight, for example. For those of you that have not looked at that fight, it was a unanimous decision. But it probably should have not been a unanimous decision. The scorecards, in my opinion, were horrific in that fight. Horrific. When you take a look at that fight now, Jamal Charlo, you can argue that he got the victory, but he went to hell and back with Matt Korobov. Now, Matt Korobov, he's a little bit slicker and trickier than what people give him credit for. But when you take a look at Matt Korobov, his first loss, and I can already know because, like I said, I know a lot about the boxing, when it comes down to it, his first loss was to Andy Lee, who was an Irish fighter. And he knocked him out, I believe, in the 6th round. You can see right there, he was an undefeated fighter. I actually didn't know he had a win over Jose Uzcategui there. But when it comes down to it, he got knocked out against Andy Lee. So this is not a guy that is known as elite. This is not a guy, all in all, that is known as a world beater. And Jamal Charlo, a lot of people thought that he lost that fight. A lot of people thought that he lost that fight. So it is what it is. So anyways, going back, another fight that you can take a look at to where a lot of people thought that Jamal Charlo lost, the Austin Trout fight. A lot of people overall thought that he maybe could have debatably lost that fight. It was either that one or the Jamal Charlo fight. One of those fights, a lot of people actually thought Austin Trout won. So you would have to take a look at it. But anyways, all right, so just going back to it, just going back to the Saul Canelo Alvarez resume. Let's go back to his resume. We're on Gennady Golovkin's. All right, now we're back on Mr. Canelo Alvarez. All right, so let's go back. So he beats Gennady Golovkin in that match when it comes down to it. The best win of his career at that point in time. All right, that makes Canelo a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter on everyone's list. Probably a top 5 pound-for-pound because he wins the rematch. Gennady Golovkin, that today is still his only loss. Now, in my opinion, if Gennady Golovkin fought Jamal Charlo or, Demetrius Andrade or David Benavidez today, he may have a chance. He may have like a 40-30% chance, but he's not the same fighter. He doesn't have the same punch resistance. He doesn't even have the same speed anymore. And Gennady has never been super-duper quick, but he was a little bit speedier and more powerful than what he is now. Gennady is not anywhere near the same fighter. It just is what it is. Then, of course, the next fight that he has is against Rocky Fielding. Now, of course, Rocky Fielding is not a guy that is really that elite of a fighter. All right, he was coming off of a loss to Callum Smith in the 1st round. But at the time, remember, Callum Smith was the Ring Magazine champion. So this was the guy that was looked at overall as the all-around best 168-pounder. Or at least all in all, that a guy that was a very, very, very decent threat. And at the time, people were saying, is Canelo going to face Callum Smith? And later on, eventually, he fought him. Now, this is not me saying, once again, that David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo and Demetrius Boo Andrade, that, they would not be very decent fights. But like I said, to say that he's just slithering in and out of the weight divisions and facing the weakest opponents and he's not facing, he's facing B and C grade competition, that's not the truth. But let's continue. His next fight, he faces Danny Jacobs. Now, I believe Danny Jacobs was coming off the win over Sergey Derevyanchenko. Now, in my opinion, like I said, Sergey Derevyanchenko, he's not a world beater. And I thought that Jamal Charlo was more impressive over him than what Danny Jacobs was. when it comes down to it, but he's still a little bit of a tricky fighter. Danny Jacobs was the one that ended up getting the first victory over him. He fought him when he was basically at the best point in his career, when he was undefeated, if you want to make that point. Canelo Alvarez goes in there against Danny Jacobs. Very competitive fight. When it comes down to it, Danny Jacobs, so in my opinion, only pulled out about 4-5 rounds at max. So Canelo Alvarez beats Danny Jacobs when he's the IBF champion. Okay, then of course, he does a unify, decides to go up to 175. Now, if you wanted to make the case here that this is where Canelo, that, he picked the weakest link at 175, I would somewhat agree with you. Because Sergey Kovalev, like I said, he's not a person that, in my opinion, he was not as good as Artur Beterbiev or Dmitry Bivol at the moment. But if you're making the case that Sergey Kovalev, that, he was just completely washed up, I don't know if I can quite agree with that either. I would say that Sergey Kovalev was kind of at a point in his career almost to where like Oscar De La Hoya was against Floyd Mayweather Jr., where, he wasn't at the best point in his career. He wasn't at his complete prime, but he still was, he was a championship caliber fighter. He still was a decent fighter. And just to prove that, I mean, I'm not going to click on his resume, but if you want to look up this for yourself, he got knocked out a couple times by this point in time. That is true. He got knocked out by Andre Ward in the rematch. Then I believe he came back against another fighter, got a quick knockout, ended up winning the WBO championship, I believe. Faces a later Alvarez, who was an undefeated prospect at the time, Colombian fighter, I believe. Actually was outboxing him, but eventually, gets defensively irresponsible like Sergey Kovalev tends to do sometimes. Doesn't keep his hands up very well. Gets knocked out in that fight, but completely embarrasses him in the rematch. Doesn't even let a later Alvarez win a round. Very good comeback. Sergey Kovalev's back in the mix. Then he faces an undefeated prospect by the name of Anthony Yarde, who some people look at as very, very talented. I don't think he's any more than a B-grade fighter, but he is decently talented. And he's still within the light heavyweight division right now. Sergey Kovalev knocked out Anthony Yarde in that fight. He was usually dominating the majority of the fight. Now, there was one round where it looked like Kovalev was about to get stopped. It was sort of like the Keith Thurman versus Josesito Lopez fight, where Keith Thurman was mainly dominating the fight, but he almost got knocked out in one round when it came down to. So that's what happened there. All right, no, Sergey Kovalev was not completely washed up, but I would not call him A+ at that point in time in his career. To be quite honest with you, I don't know if I would ever call Sergey Kovalev an A+ skilled fighter, because I just thought that he was a little bit too defensively irresponsible. But, he is a very, very good fighter. Was it the same Sergey Kovalev that fought, Andre SOG Ward? No, it wasn't, but it still was a very, very decent fighter. He was a champion, and he was coming off of two victories over 2 top 10 contenders with A-grade power and decent skills, and overall 2 fighters that were undefeated. So to say that he fought Kovalev at the worst point in his career, no, facing Sergey Kovalev now would be facing him at the worst point in his career. Did he face him at, a worse version of himself than what Andre Ward did? Yes. But still, it was a very elite win. So then, of course, next year, Canelo Alvarez, over a year until he fights. But then he faces Callum Smith. Now, Callum Smith apparently, he's coming off of a very bad performance with John Ryder. Like I said, I can't really tell you that because I never watched a John Ryder fight, so I don't personally know. But we know that Callum Smith, that overall he does have high potential. This is a dude that is about 6'1". He has A-grade power. Now, if we want to take a look at Callum Smith's resume, let's take a look at it here. This dude has 29 total fights. 28 wins, 20 wins by knockout. Very, very good power. Like I said, you can take a look at this when it comes down to it. This dude has real A-grade power. Lenny Castillo knocked him out. Knocked out Hassam Nadam when it comes down to it. Now, he's been knocked out a couple times, but certain fighters, such for example, like a David Lemieux, he was not able to knock him out. Also knocked out George Groves, and I believe all in all, that's actually how he won the Super WBA title, because George Groves and a certain amount of people said, oh, well, George Groves was washed up. That's not true. You can say that George Groves was, he lost a couple fights, but you know who George Groves actually beat? He beat Chris Eubank Jr. right before that fight. Now, Chris Eubank Jr., in my opinion, he's not an A-grade fighter, but he's a decent fighter. He's a B-grade fighter. So Callum Smith was a real deal fighter. This dude was an A- fighter, at least when it comes down to it. No doubt about it. And I'm trying to see if there's any, of course, Rocky Fielding, he's right there. But when it comes down to it, all in all, like I said, this dude was a real deal fighter. No doubt about it. So let's back up. Let's see the next person that he faces. So Avni Odirim, of course, he was coming off of a TKO loss to Chris Eubank Jr. We all know that was a C-grade fight. This next fight against Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders, multiple weight division champion. Billy Joe Saunders was the WBO super middleweight champion at the current moment in time. Now, understandably, Billy Joe Saunders, he's not known for his A-grade power, but he is a person all in all that is known as a very decently slick fighter. Let's take a look at his resume real quick when it comes down to it. And that's that's an interesting picture. That must have been from a very, very long time ago. But anyways, when it comes down to it, like I said, you take a look at it, he's undefeated. Now, this one Argentine fighter that he fought, when it came down to it, I believe all in all actually that he did not look super duper impressive in that fight. A lot of people were complaining about that. Apparently he got the knockout here actually, which I didn't know, but it is what it is. Now, if you wanted to mention all in all that he didn't necessarily, beat anyone super duper elite to get the titles, you can say that if you want to, but at the end of the day, he ended up getting the title, so it is what it is. But this is a dude that has beaten certain guys like Andy Lee, who knocked out Matt Korobov, a Matt Korobov who was able to give Jamal Charlo hell, and some would debate actually deserved the decision. He was able to completely embarrass Andy Lee. He was able to beat Chris Eubank Jr. He was able to completely embarrass David Lemieux, won every single round of that fight, beat Charles Adamu, all right, beat Martin Murray. Not, I'm not saying that any of these guys are necessarily A-grade fighters that he beat, but all these guys at least are very, very decent opponents. They're at least on the B-grade level, if you want to say that. So Billy Joe Saunders, like I said, he wasn't no scrub. This is not a guy that is coming in here all in all that is just a no-name. This is a dude that is very, very well known. All right? So once again, he's not known for his power, but he is known overall for being slick, being decently fast. He was a two-weight division champion. All right, so it is what it is. All right, so let's go back. All right, then next, of course, and this is his last fight, Mr. Caleb Plant. And of course, a lot of people now, they want to allege that this is a B or C grade opponent. Okay, well, let's take a look at his record. Now, you're not going to see a super duper amount of elite names on here. I don't know a lot of these names myself, but at the time, this Jose Uzcategui win, I believe Jose Uzcategui, he's either from Venezuela or Colombia. Let me actually click on that flag real quick, see if I can see. That's Venezuela. Okay, yeah, so he's from Venezuela. When it comes down to it, unanimous decision wins the IBF super middleweight title. For those of you that don't know, Jose Uzcategui was at the best point in his career when Caleb Plant was able to beat him. All right, it is what it is. Jose Uzcategui, he was a person that I believe he was a very rough and tough fighter. He was coming off of, there was one fight where I believe it was a disqualification loss against Andre Durrell. I believe all know that happened. There's a whole video about, his uncle punching, Jose Uzcategui in the face when it comes down to him because they all thought that the punch was a bit late when he knocked him out. So there's a disqualification. But then in the rematch, Jose Uzcategui fights him, completely dominates Andre Durrell, completely knocks him out. Let me actually see how good Andre Durrell was at the point in time. Let me see. But Jose Uzcategui was one of the top champions at the time. There, and you see right there, RTD, 8th round, Andre Durrell. Let's see overall how good he was at the time. All right, let's see how good. Now, he has 3 losses. One of those losses I know is to James DeGale. I think another one is Carl Frosch, and another one is Jose Uzcategui. All right? So he lost to James DeGale. Like I said, neither Durrell brother, in my opinion, has been super duper elite. But for those of you that believe that, they were decently good, they're at least, B grade level probably, I guess, at least when they were at their best. So he was B grade level here. Jose Uzcategui was able to knock him out. Completely overall, embarrassed him in that fight. Canelo fought the guy that completely embarrassed Jose Uzcategui. All right, that's what happened. So once again, these are all the contenders. Let me back it up a little bit more. These are all the contenders that Canelo Alvarez has fought. And these guys that I've just mentioned, a lot of these guys are A-grade champions. If I just want to go through his record, Caleb Plant, A-grade champion. All right, was coming off of a win over Jose Uzcategui. Billy Joe Saunders, A-grade champion. Callum Smith, A-grade champion. Sergey Kovalev, not necessarily the same, but I would still, debate A-. He was still very competitive. All right, Daniel Jacobs, A-grade champion. Gennady Golovkin, A-grade champion. All right, Julius Caesar Chavez Jr., Liam Smith, I wouldn't necessarily debate that. Miguel Cotto, A-grade champion. Erislandy Lara, A-grade future champion. All right, Austin Trout, A-grade champion. So, like I said, how many A-grade fighters do we have in here? We have Austin Trout, that's 1. Erislandy Lara, 2. Miguel Cotto, 3. Gennady Golovkin, 4. Danny Jacobs, 5. Sergey Kovalev, 6. Callum Smith, 7. Billy Joe Saunders, 8. And Caleb Plant, 9. That's at least 9 A-grade names that you can debate on his resume. Now, we're going to take a look at another resume. We're going to take a look at Gervonta Tank Davis's and Mikey Garcia. First up, we're going to compare Mikey Garcia. Let's go with Mikey Garcia because, like I said, there are certain fighters that do slither in and out of the weight divisions. We're going to take a look at Mikey Garcia first. Let's get into it. Okay, so just heading into it, this is Mikey Garcia. We're going to take a look at his record. Same website, Wikipedia, because once again, they are actually somewhat correct. So let's take a look at his professional boxing record. Now, you see this. He has 42 fights in this resume. Canelo Alvarez now has about 60 on there. I believe that he has 57 wins, 1 loss, 2 draws. So I believe that adds up to 60. All right, 57 wins plus 3, 2 draws, 1 loss. That's 60 fights. But on there, you can debate that there's at least, 9 A-grade names. And that's not even me talking about some of the other guys. If you want to talk about former champions like, Amir Khan or, Julius Cesar Chavez Jr. or Liam Smith, that's not even me talking about those guys. Even though I would say that, those guys were necessarily the elitist of champions, or maybe they were a bit outsized, but that's not even me mentioning those guys. But let's take a look at Mikey Garcia's record here. Now, you can take a look at it, and now, of course, he's not had the best past few years. Lost to Sandor Martin, very, very big upset when it came down to it. Lost to Errol Spence Jr., but of course, everyone thought that it was going to happen. But when you take a look at Mikey Garcia's record, this is how you know when a fighter is slithering in and out of the weight divisions, because when you take a look at his resume, and I've already said this, who on here is A grade? Take a look at it. There's no one on here that is A grade. I don't know any of these fighters that I would call A grade. Are any of these fighters A grade? Take a look within his first 27 fights. I don't even know these guys. Now, I didn't really get to watch him in the early part of his career, but once again, this is how you know someone is slithering in and out of the weight divisions. Now, he beat Orlando Salido. That actually was, excuse me, that actually was one of the better wins in his career. Let me check and see what point in time Orlando Salido was in his career. Orlando actually was a little bit better later on in his career than what he was in the early part of it, because he would get more experience and actually a little bit better. As you see, he had a victory over Vasily Lomachenko in a little bit of a controversial one. That would be a couple fights after the Vasily Lomachenko fight. So Mikey must have fought him off of a very decent point in his career. So I'll give him credit for that, but I'm not quite sure if I would say that is the A grade. I'm not sure if I would say that Orlando Salido at his best is an A grade fighter. Maybe if you want to say A minus, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that. He was able to get a victory over Vasily Lomachenko, and Orlando Salido is a person where I know he was able to get a draw over Francisco Vargas, who actually was the number 1 guy at that weight division at the time, I believe 130 pounds. And, Orlando Salido, a lot of people actually thought that he won that fight. So, you can certainly debate that. It's up to you. But, this is the time where people are actually talking about the Yuriorkis Gamboa fight. Now, Juan Manuel Lopez, I'm actually not quite too sure. I don't really remember him. That might be that's no. That I'm thinking of a different boxer. I'm thinking about the one that lost to Juan Manuel Marquez, I think, or is it the same guy? No, it's not. Okay, but yeah, he faces this guy. And this is a guy, all in all, that, is not a champion at the current moment in time. I would now call him an A-grade fighter. Roman Martinez. Now, this is a guy, all in all, that, at the time when it comes down to, I believe that he was a WBO junior, lightweight title, as it says right there. But no one thinks that Roman Martinez is an A-grade fighter. That's the problem. Roman Martinez already had a loss on his record, and he lost to Ricky Burns. Now, if you want to say that at the time that this was a decent win, that's cool. But no one who's ever defeated Roman Martinez, whether it be, Orlando Salido actually had a couple of competitive fights with him that a lot of people thought that Orlando Salido won, but he didn't get the decision. No one ever thought that Roman Martinez was an A-grade skilled boxer. No one ever thought that. No one ever thought that Roman Martinez was A-grade when Vasily Lomachenko beat him. No one ever thought that Roman Martinez was an A-grade fighter when Mikey Garcia beat him. At least in my opinion. Then he beats Juan Carlos Burgos. I believe all in all, a decent fighter, but not really overall someone that's great. Then Mikey takes this 2-year hiatus because of apparent promotional issues. But this is around the point where Yuriorkis Gamboa, he really starts to catch up to Mikey Garcia. Yuriorkis Gamboa is looked at as the major threat. I don't think all in all that he's looked at as a top 10 pound for pound fighter, but he is looked at as one of the top fighters in the sports. In the sport, excuse me. Then, of course, Yuriorkis Gamboa, he goes on to face, what's his name? Terence Crawford ends up getting knocked out. Ever since then, never the same in his career. When it comes down to it, then he faces Elio Rojas, who is a person that is pretty much a C-grade fighter. Deshaun Slatichening, that was a decent fighter at the time, but what Deshaun Slatichening was known for, the best win in his career, and he's never been heard of ever since this. The biggest win of his career, he was the first guy to defeat Ivan Redkach, who pretty much was a hype job, pretty much heading into boxing. He overall had a very, very good amateur pedigree, but he never did anything in boxing. Every big fight that he's ever been in, he's lost. He lost to Tevin Farmer. He lost to Zlatan Slichinin, whatever the hell his name is. Zlatan Slichinin, excuse me. So Slichinin, very decent win, not an A-grade win. Mikey Garcia ends up knocking him out in 3 rounds. Next fight, Adrian Broner. And he faces him, I believe, at 140. Then he says, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to chase history, and I'm going to go to 140, face Sergey Lipinis. Then, of course, he goes back down to 135, faces Robert Easter Jr. Now, I'll give Mikey Garcia some credit there. Robert Easter Jr. was an undefeated fighter. But here's the problem. When you take a look at any of these fighters, what version of these fighters are A-grade fighters? Robert Easter Jr. was a person that was known for having a 50-50 very competitive fight over Richard Commey. And no one would say that Richard Commey, even at his best, is an A-grade fighter. When you talk about Adrian Broner has never been an A-grade fighter. It just is what it is. Zlatan Slichinin, very powerful fighter, decent fighter at the time. But, Zlatan Slichinin, he's not a guy that's A-grade. If I were to compare Mikey Garcia to someone, in my opinion, it almost would be like Prince Nassim Hamed. They don't really have similar styles. But when you take a look at Prince Nassim Hamed, some of the contenders, they look okay. Some of them even look borderline very, very good. But the biggest fights in Mikey Garcia's career, the big one, that he had against Errol Spence Jr., he pretty much got his ass whooped. Now, of course, that was when he moved up 2 weight divisions. But the reason why he did that was because at the time, the overall 135-pound best was Mr. Vasily Lomachenko, and Mikey Garcia relinquished. He overall gave up his 135-pound belt. But the differences between Canelo and Mikey Garcia is that basically that would have been Canelo Alvarez never facing Gennady Golovkin or Araceli Lara. But that's not what happened. All right, that's not what happened. Canelo fought Araceli Lara, who was a big, competitive fight at the time. He fought Gennady Golovkin, who was a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter. Mikey Garcia never fought that dude. He never fought Vasily Lomachenko, who was at his own weight. So this is a dude, Mikey Garcia, when you take a look at his record, this is a guy that has slithered in and out of the weight divisions for a very, very long time. Never fought Yuriorkis Gamboa, never fought Vasily Lomachenko, the 2 biggest threats at his natural weight classes in his career. This is a person that has done this. All right? Not Saul Canelo Alvarez. Now let's take a look at another resume. We're going to take a look at Gervonta Tank Davis. All right? And that's probably going to be the last one that we'll take a look at. But let's take a look at his resume. Okay, so this is the last one that we're going to look at. This is Mr. Gervonta Tank Davis. All right, so let's go to his professional record. And let's see how many A-grade wins we can get here when it comes down to it. So the first very, very big win of Gervonta Tank Davis' career, of course, was when he became 17-0 all the way back in 2017, about 5 years ago now. That was against Jose Pedraza. Now, for those of you that don't remember, Jose Pedraza was a Puerto Rican fighter. He was undefeated at the time. I don't really remember any specifically big wins that Jose Pedraza has ever gotten, really. Maybe the Ray Beltran fight, but Ray Beltran, in my opinion, is pretty much a C-class fighter anyway. But Jose Pedraza, this was a 50-50 fight at the time. Actually, a lot of people thought that Jose Pedraza was going to win because this is actually a big step up in competition and usually what Tank was facing. All right, so it is what it is. So he wins this. Very great performance. Great performance. Still the best performance, in my opinion, that anyone has ever had against Jose Pedraza. Even better than the Vasily Lomachenko fight. Wins the IBF super featherweight title. Great fight. All right, or well, not really great fight, but great performance. Next fight, faces Liam Walsh. Now, apparently a lot of people overall thought that that was going to be a decently competitive fight. It wasn't. Liam Walsh, I think, was a undefeated contender at the time, but I don't think that he's ever been a champion. If I'm wrong about that, one of you can look it up. But, I mean, screw it. We're in it right now. Why not look at it right now? So he still only has that one loss. Has this guy ever been a champion? Let's see. No, he has not. He's never been a legitimate champion. So this is a guy that has never been a legitimate champion. I guess he had a win over Andrei Klimov, who at one point in time was a decent fighter, Russian fighter, but, nothing more than a C-class fighter. Then he faces, Francisco Fonseca, or whatever his name is. I really don't know a whole lot about that fighter, to be quite honest with you. So we'll move on. Jesus Cuellar. Now, I remember this fighter, Argentine fighter. At one point in time, he was a champion. Tank beat him at a very decent point in his career. But what I'll say about Jesus Cuellar, I would not say that he's an A-grade fighter. Jesus Cuellar, when it comes down to, if we take a look at his record, I know for sure that he lost to Abner Mares. I remember that fight. It was decently competitive, but Abner Mares, he lost. Now, see, he loses to Javier Fortuna, loses to Abner Mares. I don't know how that was a split decision because it wasn't even that competitive. Now, the first loss in his career, I'm not actually sure. Oscar Escadon, I remember that fighter, short fighter, a very long time ago. But this guy, at one point in time, somewhat of a champion. WBA regular featherweight title. Beats Victor Archinian, but Victor Archinian, he's been done ever since he's been knocked out against, against Nonito Donaire. So WBA regular featherweight title. If you want to count that as a legitimate champion, I guess you could. But this is what I'm saying. These champions, they're not on the same level. These guys are not on the same level. A lot of these guys have already suffered losses, or Gervonta Tank Davis is actually facing these guys when they're done in their career. That's the difference. Hugo Ruiz, to be honest with you, I'm not really even quite sure who that is. Don't really know who Ricardo Nunez is either. Yuriorkis Gamboa, this fight happened a few years ago in 2019. Everyone knew that Yuriorkis Gamboa was done at this point in time in his career. Multiple knockout losses at this point in time. Was coming off of a knockout victory over Roman Martinez, I believe, but Roman Martinez, ever since the Vasily Lomachenko knockout especially, he was done. Now, some people may say, oh, well, Roman Martinez was actually done before that. Actually, no, he was not, because he had two very competitive fights with Orlando Salido, who actually at the point in time was coming off of a victory and a draw over Francisco Vargas, I believe, a victory over Lomachenko not too long ago, and a draw over Orlando Salido. So actually, you have to check your facts when it comes down to you. Overall, have to know what you're talking about. Like I said, Vasily Lomachenko beat Roman Martinez. I'm not going to say, if you want to say that Mikey Garcia beat him at a better point in his career, you can. But at the end of the day, Vasily Lomachenko still beat Roman Martinez when he was coming off of victories. So it is what it is. So he faces Yuriorkis Gamboa. Then next fight, beats Leo Santa Cruz. This is hands down the biggest victory of his career. No doubt about it. Now, Leo Santa Cruz only had one loss in his career prior to this. And then that loss was to Carl Frampton. He was able to avenge that loss in the rematch, then continues to face Chris Avalos, but Avalos has really never been known as a, world beater, but a decent contender back in the day. Abner Mares, he was able to beat him in both fights. There really was no reason for that rematch whatsoever. Beats Miguel Flores, one vacant WBO super featherweight title. Now, this is a fighter that, you can say was a legitimate champion. A legitimate champion. This is hands down the best victory in Gervonta Tank Davis' career. But keep in mind, he's not facing Vasily Lomachenko. He never fought Gary Russell Jr., never fought Oscar Valdez, never fought Shakur Stevenson. And at this time, Vasily Lomachenko was calling him out. And what is he doing? He basically said that he don't want to fight him. So that's what he's doing. Once again, this guy he doesn't have the wins on his resume that Canelo has. He's not fighting, the same competition. Then next fight, he faces Mario Barrios, who was the regular WBA super lightweight title. Mario Barrios, he has none of the official belts in this division. People tried to argue at the time that Mario Barrios, like Dante, I reviewed a video on it very long ago. He tried to argue that Mario Barrios was one of the top 3 guys at the time. No, he wasn't, because at the time, Regis Prograis was still in the division. Josh Taylor was holding 2 of the belts, and so was Jose Ramirez. You also had Jose Zepeda in that division and Victor Postal. I don't know if you would rank Mario Barrios ahead of any of those fighters. Mario Barrios, now once again, for these people that like to debate, Canelo faces these guys close to their worst performances. If you're going to make that argument with Canelo, no problem. But then why don't you make the same argument with Gervonta Tank Davis? Because Mario Barrios, he actually, had a very competitive fight with this dude, Akhmedov. And Akhmedov, he's a decent little fighter. For those of you that don't remember that fight, Mario Barrios, to be honest with you, he probably should have got a draw in that fight. And he probably would have lost all in all if the Russian would have not got dropped a couple times in that fight, because he came in a little bit too aggressive at times with his hands down. But if you want to say that Canelo usually faces guys off their worst performances, it was the same thing here. All right, it is what it is. Then, of course, he, beats up Ryan Carl, but Ryan Carl really never accomplished anything in his career. Then he faces Isaac Cruz. Now, Isaac Cruz, he was coming off of a little bit of a, good streak when it came down to it. But no one thinks that this guy is A-grade. That's why the pay-per-view numbers tanked. Those are the facts. There's a reason why Canelo Alvarez in his last fight against Caleb Plant did 900,000 pay-per-view buys. Like I said, you don't just pull 900,000 pay-per-view buys out of your ass. It just is what it is. It happens because it's a decently big fight. But take a look at Mr. Isaac Cruz. Now, he beat Francisco Vargas, but Francisco Vargas, who was the former number 1 130-pounder, completely done at this point in time in his career. Knocked out multiple times overall by Miguel Berchelt. I believe even possibly had a couple of other losses, but decently impressive. Decently impressive. Knocks out Diego Magdaleno, but, Diego, I believe, was already knocked out by Teofimo Lopez. But here's the thing here. No championships. He's never even been a regular champion. He's never even been an interim champion. So once again, for the people that are saying that, Canelo compared to some of these guys, he's facing the worst competition, that's not true. Like I said, I know what it looks like when a fighter is slithering out of the weight divisions and facing the weakest contenders possible. This is what Gervonta Tank Davis is doing. Let's go back to his record. This is what Mikey Garcia did. Because when you take a look at it, Mikey never fought the Yuriorkis Gamboa. He never fought the Vasyl Lomachenko. And when you take a look at Gervonta Tank Davis's record, where's the Gary Russell Jr.? Where's the Oscar Valdez? Where's the Shakur Stevenson? If you want to argue that Oscar Valdez and Shakur Stevenson, that they were a little bit later on, no problem. Where's the Tevin Farmer? He want to get in the ring with Tevin Farmer. Where's the Tevin Farmer? Where's the Vasyl Lomachenko? Where's the Devin Haney? Where's the Teofimo Lopez? Where's the Jose Ramirez? Where's the Regis Prograis? Where's the Josh Taylor? He's not facing any of these fighters. So like I said, for the people that are stating, all in all, that, Canelo, he's just picking and choosing his fights and he's facing the weakest links, you don't know what you're talking about. Like I said, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Canelo, he's not done some maneuvering here and there. But like I said, I just broke it down with facts in this video. It just is what it is. I just told you all in all. So once again, for the people that are stating that, Canelo, he's facing people out their worst performances. No, he's not. No, he's not. He's facing people and they're completely done and washed up. No, he's not. Facing Yuriorkis Gamboa in 2019 is facing a fighter that was completely washed up. You can't be completely washed up and be a champion coming off of 2 victories all in all over 2 undefeated prospects, like in a later Alvarez and Anthony Yarde, like Sergey Kovalev was. So don't give me that crap. It is what it is. But once again, where's the Vasyl Lomachenko? Where are all these fighters on Gervonta Tank Davis's resume? He's 26-0. There's debatably no A-grade fighters on there besides Leo Santa Cruz. So why does Canelo Alvarez, who apparently has always been maneuvering this way, allegedly when it comes down to, that's what they say, always been moving this way, always been avoiding the top contenders, why is there 9 A-grade fighters that were at a very decent point in their career, an A-grade point in their career, on his resume? Go ahead and answer me that question. It just is what it is. Because you can't say the same thing about Mikey Garcia. You can't say the same thing about Gervonta Tank Davis. You can't say that. It just is what it is. But that's pretty much about it for this video. I just thought that I would break that down because, once again, this rumor always goes around when it comes down to it, and it's just complete horseshit. Like I said, I know what it looks like when the champion is maneuvering from weight division to weight division to avoid the best contender of the weight division. Canelo, like I said, if you want to say that he hasn't fought Charlo or Andrade or Benavidez, you can go ahead and take a look at it. But like I said, Benavidez and Andrade and Charlo, they've never been super duper above those fighters. They've just been greater athletes, if you want to state that when it comes down to it. But at the end of the day, David Benavidez, Charlo, Demetrius Andrade, they've never been more dominant than Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, or Callum Smith. All those guys have had multiple unimpressive performances, actually, on the record, if you want to bring it up. David Benavidez had a split decision in his, that first fight when he was going for the WBC super middleweight title against the Gavro, I believe, that one Romanian fighter who's never been, anything more than a C-grade fighter. All right? When you talk about Jamal Charlo, a lot of people thought that he lost to Trout. A lot of people thought that he lost to Korobov. He's had a couple of unimpressive performances. There's multiple performances in his career that people would argue that he should have lost. Just like Saul Canelo Alvarez. But when Saul Canelo Alvarez, debatably lost overall, the bigger fights of his career, they were elite fighters like Gennady Golovkin or very crafty fighters like Araceli Lara. So this is what I'm saying. They're not on the same level. All right? It is what it is. Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade did not have that impressive of a performance against Liam Williams. Had a split decision over both Vanos Murderosian and Jack Koke. All right? Jack Koke, who's a person that I believe is a German fighter, hasn't really done shit with his career. So like I said, don't go spreading this narrative because it's not true overall that Canelo Alvarez, that he's just ducking the clear better fighters. Andrade and Charlo and Benavidez have never been clearly greater than a Caleb Plant or overall a Callum Smith or Billy Joe Saunders. Now, if you want to argue that they're more talented athletes, I would somewhat agree with you. But like I said, they've never been clearly overall above any of those fighters. That's why I say they're all within the same league. Go ahead and take a look at the record. Take a look at those fights. If you don't believe me, I'll name you several fights right now. Take a look at Demetrius Andrade versus Jack Koke. Take a look at Demetrius Andrade versus Liam Williams. Take a look at Demetrius Andrade versus Vanos Murderosian. Those are the fights that you should watch if you think that Demetrius Andrade looks so much more impressive than those fighters that Canelo has fought as of recently. Now, if you want the Charlo fights, watch the Matt Korobov versus Jamal Charlo fight and the Austin Trout versus Jamal Charlo fight. All right, or I think it was Jamal. Maybe it was Jamel that looked unimpressive because both of them fought Austin Trout. All right, and then if you want to know David Benavidez, look at his first fight against Gavril. Now, some of these fighters have grown since that time, but like I said, some of these fights also are not that long ago. So it just is what it is. But anyways, overall, I just thought that I would break that down because I thought that would be particularly interesting. But that's really about it for this video, and I'll talk to you all later.